Hi, when you think about international relationships, India and the Gulf states seem like natural allies with centuries of shared history. But what happens when religious tensions and social media collide with billions in trade deals? That's exactly what we're exploring today.
That's such an interesting point about the collision between modern technology and ancient ties. We're talking about a relationship worth over $100 billion in annual trade.
Well, let me break this down with some fascinating numbers. There are nearly 9 million Indians living in Gulf countries, sending back roughly $40 billion in remittances annually. And yet, this massive economic relationship can be shaken by a single social media post.
So, what exactly makes this relationship so volatile despite such strong economic ties?
You know, it really comes down to three major flashpoints. The first was the Babri Masjid demolition in 1992. This was a watershed moment. When Hindu nationalist groups destroyed this 16th century mosque, it triggered not just riots in India, but massive protests across the Gulf region.
Hmm. And how did Gulf governments respond to that incident?
Well, the reaction was unprecedented at the time. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait saw major street protests, diplomatic missions faced intense criticism, and here's what's really interesting. It was the first time we saw Gulf countries collectively pressure India over its domestic religious issues.
That must have created some serious diplomatic challenges for India, especially considering the size of its expatriate population in the Gulf.
Exactly right. And then fast forward to 2002, when the Gujarat riots happened. Over 1,000 people killed, mostly Muslims, and suddenly India's facing this massive international backlash. But here's what made it different. By 2002, we had 24-hour news coverage, making the impact much more immediate and visceral.
Tell me, Mr. Abdulaziz, more about how modern technology has changed these dynamics.
Well, Salma, just look at what happened in 2022 with the Prophet Muhammad remarks controversy. One spokesperson makes offensive comments, and within hours, not days or weeks like in the past, you've got Qatar, Kuwait, and Iran summoning Indian ambassadors. Social media amplified the outrage so quickly that some Gulf supermarkets started pulling Indian products from their shelves before any official diplomatic response.
That's fascinating how social media has transformed traditional diplomacy. What are the economic implications when these tensions flare up?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Gulf states have invested over $13 billion in India since 2000. When these controversies erupt, you're not just risking diplomatic relationships, you're potentially threatening billions in investments, energy security, and the livelihoods of millions of expatriate workers.
And how has India adapted its diplomatic approach in response to these challenges?
They've had to completely overhaul their crisis management strategy. They now maintain rapid response diplomatic teams specifically for religious sensitivity issues. They've also started engaging more with Gulf media and religious leaders, trying to build those relationships before crises hit.
That's really interesting how they've had to evolve their approach. What about the cultural aspect of this relationship?
Well, that's actually where some of the most promising solutions are emerging. India has started investing heavily in cultural diplomacy, interfaith dialogues, academic exchanges, joint cultural festivals. The idea is to create what experts call shock absorbers, relationships and understanding that can help weather these periodic storms.
So, what does the future look like for this relationship?
It's fascinating because we're seeing this relationship expand into entirely new areas: artificial intelligence, renewable energy, space technology. But here's the key insight. Economic ties alone aren't enough. What's really needed is what I call a diplomatic infrastructure that can handle religious and cultural sensitivities in real time.
That makes a lot of sense given how quickly these situations can escalate now.
And here's what I think is the most important takeaway. This relationship offers a crucial lesson for international diplomacy in the digital age. You can have billions in trade, centuries of shared history, but if you don't manage the cultural and religious aspects of your relationship, especially in this age of instant communication, you're always going to be vulnerable to crisis.
Those are really thoughtful observations about such a complex relationship.
Well, as we wrap up, I think it's worth noting that despite all these challenges, the India-Gulf relationship continues to grow stronger. It's a testament to how economic interests and cultural understanding can work together to build resilience in international relationships.